Sue asked about full body organ inflammation. Can I talk about full body organ inflammation? Okay, so Sue, thank you for that question. And just like I was telling, I believe Melinda earlier, when you ask me these questions, I will get to the root cause of things. Um, I am not a believer in just band-aid and putting, a patchwork, treatment or whatever, a pill for every ill kind of thing. I really like to get to the root cause of things. So when you talk about full body organ inflammation, I'm assuming you're talking about systemic inflammation. And so, what are the signs of systemic inflammation? Fatigue and skin issues and aches and pains and digestive issues, constant headaches, histamine intolerance, maybe brain fog, hormonal imbalance. I mean, pretty much everything that you can think of. Inflammation is really the cause of it. So chronic inflammation, when you have chronic systemic inflammation, it causes mitochondrial dysfunction, which is really the root cause of all disease. So that's why they say inflammation is the root cause of all disease. It causes a mitochondrial dysfunction, which causes you to age, and your mitochondria don't function properly. And we learned this in 6th grade that mitochondria is a powerhouse of the body. So if you don't have powerhouse of the body, then you are not functioning. So yes, chronic inflammation really is the root cause of all diseases. What are the causes? Like, what are some of the causes that are, for chronic inflammation? So, a diet that is high in very high carbs and sugar, big cause of chronic inflammation. Trans fats, like just poor oils and margarines and vegetable oils and things like that, and then high fructose corn syrup is just something that is a major cause of inflammation. I tell all my friends and patients and whoever I'm working with that if there's one dietary change you can make right now, right away, is to take out high fructose corn syrup from your diet. Just go into your pantry, go into your refrigerator, anything that has high fructose corn syrup, you got to chuck that stuff out. It's just so bad for you. And I'm trying to teach my kids the same stuff as well, if possible, to just really not have any foods with high fructose corn syrup. So high stress or trauma, I'm a perfect example of that. You go through very high levels of stress for extended periods of time, then you are going to have systemic inflammation. Our bodies are made to adapt to a little bit of stress. So if you cut your finger or you see a dog and you're scared of dogs and you run, or something little like that, that it's actually helpful for our body, and that little bit amount of stress is very helpful. But beyond that, if you have chronic stress, then you will cause systemic inflammation. And so that's a big cause. Lack of sleep, people who sleep, 6 hours or less every night, you are causing, serious inflammation. And then alcohol, it is so difficult for the body to detoxify alcohol, and especially for the liver. And so you're causing systemic inflammation as you go along. And then insulin resistance. If you have insulin resistance, then you are going to have significant amount of systemic inflammation. So what is insulin resistance? That's another long-winded answer, but I'll just quickly try to put it in this context here. So insulin resistance, you go to your doctor's office and they test your fasting glucose. They tell you in the morning, go to the doctor, get your blood drawn, make sure you haven't eaten or drank anything in 12 hours. What they're testing for is your fasting glucose. So what is your glucose level in your blood after you haven't eaten for about 8 to 10 hours is what they're testing. The problem with that is that what it doesn't recognize and it doesn't pick up is that if I go in and my fasting insulin is, let's say, 95, fasting glucose is 95, and you go in and your fasting insulin is 95, what it doesn't take into account, both of us would be considered healthy and the doctor would be like, great, you're good, go home. What it doesn't take into account is, how much insulin am I producing to keep it at 95? So am I producing, 6 milliliters, let's just say, of insulin? And that's what's keeping me at 95. But you, let's just say maybe are producing 25 units of insulin to keep you at that level of 95. So your body is working a lot harder than my body in keeping that glucose level down. And so that's why I feel like fasting glucose is not a good indicator, because at that point you really need to know how much insulin is being produced to keep that glucose levels down. And so when your body continues producing more and more, today it had to produce 25, and then tomorrow you had a big, plate of pasta and pizza for dinner, and so then it had to produce 40 units and things like that. Over time, as this keeps building up and up and up, then you start building what is called insulin resistance. So your body has to produce more and more and more insulin to try and break down all the carbs and the sugar that you're eating. And so that's called insulin resistance, where at a certain point your body gets resistant to it. When that happens is when you start getting systemic inflammation. You get a lot of inflammation around your organs and your ovaries and testes and liver and fatty liver and things like that, because it's your body's natural way of trying to protect itself and protect those vital organs. And so you start having kind of inflammation around those joints, around the organs, to try and help protect those organs from all this high sugar that you're taking in. So, that is also a big cause of inflammation. And then if you've been exposed to toxins, or pesticides or pollutants, and then, men and women, we use, beauty products and soaps and things in the morning, then, you are really exposing your body to a lot of toxins. And then hormonal imbalance. If you are estrogen dominant, men or women for that matter, or you have very decreased testosterone, things like that will cause full body inflammation or systemic inflammation. And that is a big issue with, just healing, with disease causing diseases and processes and things like that. So you had asked about, talking about full body full body inflammation, and so systemic inflammation. And so what are the tests? I quickly wrote down a few things. I mean, you really need a lot more than this. But if you go to your doctor's office and they check for CRP levels, that is a huge indicator of your inflammation levels. And so 0 to 1 milligram per ml is ideal, but anything over 1 milligram shows that you're having inflammation. Most people have 2 and up. And I remember when I was really, really sick, my inflammatory markers were through the roof, including my CRP. My SED rate at one point when I was very ill, I think was about 45, which is a ridiculous ESR. The conventional medicine world says anything less than 20 is good, but in the functional medicine world, we do not want your SED rate, your ESR, any more than 10, because any more than 10 shows that the disease process is starting. And then hemoglobin A1C, you want it between 4.5 and 5.2. Fasting insulin that I was talking about, anything less than 6 is very, very ideal, and it's very healthy, especially if you're trying to heal from diseases. And then homocysteine levels between 6 and 9. Again, mine were through the roof when I was very sick, and it shows an inflammatory process. But then, of course, I went to 2 hepatologists, 2 rheumatologists. They looked at my numbers from a conventional medicine perspective, and they were like, nope, you're fine. Your inflammatory markers are 45. They're slightly elevated. Nothing to worry about. Whereas in the functional medicine world, they said, no, we need your ESRs less than 10. You're at 45. You're 4 times as much as you need to be. That means there's a serious inflammatory process going on in your body. And sure enough, I was very sick, but they just kept telling me I was super healthy. My primary care, I went to see her once, and then I went to see her 4 months later, and both times she just said I was the healthiest person she had ever seen. I was a poster child for her. Her patients all drank 5 Cokes a day, and that I was such a healthy eater and exercise fanatic and all that stuff. And it just, she just sent me away saying I was healthy. And then vitamin D, I was talking about this earlier on when I said I would mention some levels. So optimal dose for vitamin D is 50. You have to have your vitamin D levels 50 and above for normal people. But if you're trying to cure disease, you want to be above 70. Between 70 and 90 is, really acceptable for people who are really ill. And then serum ferritin, red blood cell width, lipid panel. I mean, these are just things to check for the inflammatory markers to see if you have an inflammatory process going on. So, as always, what do I do with this information? How do I treat this? Um, the number one thing for systemic inflammation and things to do is diet. The number one thing. I don't know if you guys have heard of Terry Wald and her book, and she's got so many videos and podcasts. Like, she's an amazing, amazing person. And I cannot remember her. She's a research scientist. I think she's a PhD. And she got very, very sick with MS. And she has this just fantastic protocol now. It's called a Wald protocol, where she was bedridden. She was in a wheelchair, and she basically treated herself with just food. Just food. And so that's the new Wald protocol that she's come out with. It is fantastic. That's Wald, like WAHLS. The Wald protocol. I mean, she would have like 7 to 9 cups of fruits and vegetables a day, and really, really brought her inflammatory markers down and just really treated her MS, and she's just doing wonderfully now. I mean, you listen to that podcast, and I was bawling through it because at one point she rides the bike on campus, and she's crying, I'm crying. Like, it was just, you have to hear this story. So, um, if you haven't seen it or read about it, check out Terry Walls and her book and her podcast. But that's a really, really good way to treat your inflammatory markers, is to start bringing them down with diet. And it's not just diet, like, yes, let's cut out the refined carbs and the flours and the, things, the white flour and stuff like that. But then also really introduce the very, very good stuff. The other thing that's very good for inflammation, systemic inflammation, is saunas, because it activates your heat shock proteins. And so sauna is really good. What I like to do is I do the sauna at the gym, and then immediately I do a very ice cold shower. And so this is something we learned in PT school for inflammation in general for the joints. We would do contrast baths, where we would put their let's just say ankle or foot or whatever in warm water, and then 5 minutes later put it in cold water, and really that vasodilation, vasoconstriction, we would really get a lot of the fluid out of there. And so when I got really sick, I just said, you know what, I'm going to apply this principle. And I started doing the sauna, and then immediately in a cold plunge or in a cold bath or anything like that, and I would feel so much better. My joints would hurt less, and my, inflammation in my hands and my feet would go down. So sauna is very, very critical for decreasing inflammatory markers. And then PEMF is actually very good for inflammation. You can look it up. They have mats. I know last time I talked about Joov, Joov, and I believe they have come out with, sorry, Joov was the red light, but the infrared blanket that I use, I have forgotten the name of that company, but they also have a PEMF mat. Infrared is also very, very good for systemic inflammation. That's something I used as well, and I still continue till this day, especially after vigorous exercise. It really helps bring a lot of blood to the muscles, so I really like red light therapy. And then fasting. Fasting is actually a really, really good way of causing autophagy, and which is killing all the dead cells and the decayed and the diseased cells, and then bringing in new cells. So fasting is a really good way to decrease your inflammatory markers. So I hope that helps. Again, long-winded answer to Sue's question about systemic inflammation.